absolutely. Thank you for asking me to talk. I assume you've obviously been told about the topic I'm going to cover. And for formality's sake, as Ms. Brotman said, I'm here to talk about Satanism as Weltanschauung, a religion codified by Anton Szandor LaVey in 1966, but based upon human principles and natural law, as opposed to supernatural or idealized vision of what should be. I am a priest in the Church of Satan and can act as an official representative of that organization. And I hope to give, in this talk that follows, a general overview of the philosophy and then focus on a few specific topics that differentiate Satanism from other occult philosophies and religious faiths. I will first give you my bona fides, if you will. Unlike the dog collar wearers, the self-flagellators, the habitual grovelers, I won't presume that you believe that I have authority to speak on the subject just by telling you that I have a title. I do not have any sort of pretension in that sense, though I might have others. I've applied the term Satanist to myself for about 17 or 18 years. It was a few years after that, in 1996, that I joined the Church of Satan. I've considered myself an atheist just as long. I was effectively an agnostic before then. I am not an ex-Catholic, a disenchanted Mohammedan. I did not escape some white light cult or recovering from some hippie commune. I am no Wiccan gone bad. I have been given an honorary priesthood, but I am not, however, a professional Satanist. I am not here to sell you incense, pewter trinkets, or books of secrets. I'm a professional graphic designer, a publisher, and a sign maker, among other things. That said, I'm also not here to change your personal beliefs, and I am certainly not here to recruit. Satanism is not evangelistic. Don't take offense, but I honestly don't care if you agree or disagree with me at the end of this talk. My goal is to entertain you for a few minutes, maybe give you something to consider, answer a few questions, and then we will probably never meet again, though I do see a friend in the back of the room. Thank you. That said, I do enjoy a serious discussion, and I will do my best to answer questions after I'm done with my prepared words. It was in 1996 that I was performing in an industrial noise performance art music project called Aurelia Sect with my partner, Joe Morgan. We were influenced by groups such as Einstein Neubauten, Throbbing Gristle, and Non. We were just as influenced by the Italian Futurists, Dada, Bauhaus, and other art movements, including Richard Wagner's concept of Gesamtkunstwerk. Unfortunately, we didn't have a Bavarian king to bankroll our performances, so our stage show was scaled back from the ring cycle a bit. We built instruments and even experimented with infrasound, which is the sound frequencies above and below human audible levels, some said to cause physiological reactions in the body and oftentimes death at certain hertz. Luckily, we didn't kill anybody, but we did get some fascinating anecdotes of physiological and psychological response. Here is a photograph of a performance titled Lycanthropy Ritual. The meaning is pretty straightforward. A man is a beast, and the sex and violence that infers is what makes him human. And this is a core principle of satanic thought. Man is an animal. It can be found on the first page of the founding book, the Satanic Bible, in a list called the Nine Satanic Statements. It is the seventh. 7. Satan represents man as just another animal, sometimes better, more often worse than those that walk on all fours, who, because of his divine spiritual and intellectual development, has become the most vicious beast of all. Since that blood-soaked night, I have performed music, public oratory, designed and published many books, emceed burlesque and fashion shows, run my own business, been bloody on stage yet again, gotten married and have my own home, curated gallery exhibitions, been published in a few periodicals, dabbled in photography, produced a series of podcasts, and given a lecture or two with PowerPoint slides. How meta is this? I even admit to having been interviewed on Baltimore's 98 rock station by Mickey and Amelia. Being on hold meant that that was the first time I actually listened to that station. In short, I've spent my teenage years and through my adult life stalking the fringes of culture, immersing myself in the ideas and actions that excite me. The point being, Satanism is about this world, not some hereafter or fantasy. It's a hard-nosed, pragmatic philosophy that indulges in the ultimate antinomian and egoistic symbolism, that of Satan, the rebel, the accuser. It strives for occult knowledge, not in some New Age, Ouija board, a magic crystal sense, but in the true meaning of the word, knowledge and experience that is hidden from the common man, shadowed by the veil of mastery and taboo. It encourages that once noble word, discrimination. It has now fallen out of favor, but that is merely the ability to distinguish that which is good and productive from that which is bad and destructive. Satanism is not a thing that you do. It is not a picture, but the frame. It is not worship. It is not subservience. It is prideful and it asserts man with no master greater than himself. We are our own gods. And it is as with the great pantheons of antiquity, there are greater and lesser deities. And as we all know, most of the gods of the past now reside in the dustbins of history. Now I'm going to start with two frequently asked questions. It is highly probable that one or many of you will think or would try to ask these questions because they're almost always asked. For brevity, I will just give you the answers. 1, no, we do not sacrifice babies and animals. 2, yes, it is possible to call yourself a Satanist and not believe in a supernatural being that is known as Satan. Now, I won't dwell on further trivialities and urban legends. There is a great quantity of basic information and real information on the Church of Satan website and imprinted in the basic books. Some of it I will go over here, but I encourage those who want more information to go there and read. Anton Szandor LaVey, the founder of modern Satanism, was fond of saying, "Satanism demands study, not worship." Satanism is not a religion of the masses. We do not claim that everyone can be a Satanist or will benefit from adopting the worldview. It should come as no surprise to you that many who claim to be Satanists are nothing close to it. The last thing I want to hear about is how you had a friend in high school that called themselves a Satanist. Sure, it's possible. Probable? Not likely. People seem to fail on the basic critical thinking test when the S word is involved, just as with any other scapegoated idea. One can call themselves a communist without knowing the first thing about Marx. One can join the Communist Party without having committed themselves thoroughly to the proletarian revolution. The exact same is true of every other religious, philosophical, or political movement. Clearly, this pretense of expertise has been working quite effectively in the art world for decades. The current head of the Church of Satan, Peter H. Gilmore, in his essay, The Myth of the Satanic Community and Other Virtual Delusions, stated, "Satanism is a very unique philosophy, which has spawned an even more unusual movement and an organization, the Church of Satan, which has found a means for facilitating the interaction of a membership comprised of radical individualists. It is, in an apparent paradox, that is a third side synthesis. It is an organization for non-joiners. The structural basis for the Church of Satan is the cabal concept. It is maintained, for the most part, as an underground cell system of individuals who share the basis of philosophy created by Anton Szandor LaVey, but who find very unique ways of applying this philosophy towards their own personal goals. Above the surface, you may see some spokespersons, but like an iceberg, most of our membership remains hidden in the murky depths. Many members have chosen to affiliate, but do not want to find others with whom to associate. Their reason for membership is to affirm their allegiance to the organization that publicly represents the philosophy that they hold dear, which gave name to that which they really are. These members do not interact with other members. They don't seek out fellow Satanists. They remain underground and pursue personal goals. We support these valued members who are non-joiners, and their commitment remains strictly confidential. You can be a Satanist and not be a member of the Church of Satan, in short. If you are a member of the Church of Satan and prove yourself to be incapable of applying the basic philosophy, you will be unceremoniously kicked out. Those who have made a living touring daytime talk shows and backwoods churches are wrong. No black robe-clad minions of the devil will hunt you down for leaving. You're out and we could give a shit. Sometimes I will refer to it as a religion, and sometimes as a philosophy, sometimes as a worldview or Weltanschauung when I'm feeling my Teutonic blood. It is all of those to a degree, with a few caveats, mainly in the semantic problems associated with the terms. A religion can simply be defined as a personal set or institutionalized system of religious attitudes, beliefs, and practices, but most definitions have the words faith and supernatural in them. Neither of these two words are applicable in understanding Satanism. Nothing is taken on faith, and nothing exists outside of nature. It is a tired response that people so often make when they say, well, you have faith every day, or some such nonsense. No, I do not have faith when I walk across a street or get on an airplane. I accept the laws of physics and probability. It is ironic that airplanes always seem to be the test case in this scenario, because I found that it would take a lot more of this so-called faith to get on a Baltimore bus than it would a commercial airliner any day. We're used to discussing things using metaphorical language, but many people seem to be either intentionally credulous or are just merely doltish when it comes to discussing the dreaded S word. In one fell swoop, their critical facilities cease and they begin bickering over unimportant semantic details or demand that Satanism be some sort of theory of everything. Well, able to answer any and all questions in regards to the natural or intellectual worlds. Satanism does not reconcile general relativity and quantum mechanics, but it never claimed to either. It doesn't claim to be the infallible word of an invisible, all-powerful being. Quite the contrary. It postulates that all men are fallible, self-serving, and frequently dull. Things may get better, but they'll never be perfect. Satanism has at its heart romanticism, and in its brains enlightenment. The use of objective knowledge and the championing of the scientific method, but not stripped of the accoutrement of the poetic and theatrical. There has been quite a bit of academic interest in the philosophy and this new religious movement since its inception. Though I'll replay an episode from the 1970s a little later. It's interesting that the first international conference on Satanism was held in Norway just in 2009. It was so popular that they are preparing for a second in Sweden this year. There has been few droughts of media coverage of the Church of Satan, though there has certainly been peaked periods where the worst sort of bullshit scaremongering has been distributed. The satanic panic of the 1980s did a lot more harm to innocent Christians or pagans than any evidence that it harmed real Satanists. But that's the price of society. People are apt to believe the dumbest things on no evidence whatsoever. As an animal, we are still very herd-like. One of us starts running in fear through the pasture. Soon enough, the whole mass is stampeding in the same direction. From tulip mania to witch crazes to believing a Playboy bunny when she tells us that she is an indigo mom and has a crystal child and vaccines cause autism. Please look up Jenny McCarthy bodycount.com for more information on that. As far as we've come along, we still vote in politicians who run the goddamn country, who are apt to believe Guam may tip over when there are too many people on it, that 9/11 was an inside job, and Jesus Christ is their Lord and personal Savior. Now, previously I made mention of the seventh of the 9 Satanic Statements, and I want now to review those in toto. They are at the core the concepts of Satanism as a worldview. They were written well before the publication of the Satanic Bible in 1968, and they are prominently placed as the first page after the front matter of that book. 1. Satan represents indulgence instead of abstinence. 2. Satan represents vital existence instead of spiritual pipe dreams. 3. Satan represents undefiled wisdom instead of hypocritical self-deceit. 4. Satan represents kindness to those who deserve it instead of love wasted on ingrates. 5. Satan represents vengeance instead of turning the other cheek. 6. Satan represents responsibility to the responsible instead of concern for psychic vampires. 7. Again, Satan represents man as just another animal, sometimes better, more often worse than those that walk on all fours, who, because of his divine spiritual and intellectual development, has become the most vicious animal of all. 8. Satan represents all of the so-called sins, as they all lead to physical, mental, or emotional gratification. 9. Satan has been the best friend the church has ever had, as he's kept it in business all these years. It was the night of April 30th, Walpurgisnacht, in 1966, that Anton Szandor LaVey ceremonially shaved his head and proclaimed it year 1 of the age of Satan. He formed the Church of Satan, and after years of leading discussions and holding lectures with a group known as the Magic Circle, it was 2 years later that he released the Satanic Bible, a collection of essays ranging on topics from sex to magic and musings on human nature. It has continued to sell many thousands of copies every year, and though it is with the same large publisher for over 40 years, it has never had one paid advertisement placed for it or a single review by a major book reviewer. The first part of the Satanic Bible, called the Book of Satan, is an appropriation of parts of an obscure and long out-of-print book titled Might is Right by the pseudonymous author Ragnar Redbeard. It comes closest to being like the Bible, in that it is a bombastic work of poetry, seething with vitriol and lust for life. It is a triumphal rejection of the status quo. I question all things as I stand before the festering and varnished facades of your haughtiest moral dogma. I write therein in letters of blazing scorn, lo and behold, all this is fraud. Too long the dead hand has been permitted to sterilize living thought. No creed must be accepted upon authority of a divine nature. Religions must be put to the question. No moral dogma must be taken for granted. No standard of measurement deified. There is nothing inherently sacred about moral codes. Like the wooden idols of long ago, they are the work of human hands. And what man has made, man can destroy. He that is slow to believe anything and everything is of great understanding, for belief in one false principle is the beginning of all unwisdom. Whenever, therefore, A lie has built unto itself a throne. Let it be assailed without pity and without regret. For under the domination of an inconvenient falsehood, no one can prosper. And the most dangerous lie of all enthroned lies is the holy, the privileged lie. It is the lie that everyone believes to be a model truth. It is the fruitful mother of all other popular errors and delusions. Here we see a bedrock of skepticism, the application of the scientific method to morality. In the world of science, all knowledge is provisional. We understand the world as best as we've been able to decipher it, and we're waiting for either further confirmation of current knowledge or new discoveries that overturn our notions. Nothing is assumed permanent, and certainly nothing is sacred. I will state that although this scientific method is the best way to understand the natural world, it is used by humans that are flawed. The method, the tool of science, is inherently self-correcting, but only if there are people willing and able to see the errors that need to be corrected. There are also those who become deeply entrenched in a theory and will fall prey to their own biases and faulty thinking. Whereas the world's religions speak of an axiomatic truth revealed by deity, Satanism speaks of an indefatigable skepticism. LaVey even gives a rather pithy quote in regards to mind-body dualism. He no longer can view himself in two parts, the carnal and the spiritual, but sees them merge as one, and then, to his abysmal horror, discovers that there is only the carnal and always has been. After Anton LaVey died in 1997, the leadership of the organization was passed first to his confidante and mother of his son, Xerxes, Blanche Barton. She soon passed it on to the current high priest and priestess, Peter H. Gilmore and Peggy Nadramia, two longtime members who have been active in publishing material on Satanism and representing the organization in the media. It was 10 years later that Peter was ready to publish his own book, and I and my partner were in a position to make it happen. Though there were a number of other publishers that would be willing to release his book, Peter knew that we would produce a superior product that most publishers would be unwilling and unable to create. Thus, on Walpurgisnacht of 2007, his collection of essays and rituals titled The Satanic Scriptures was released to serve as a true companion to the Satanic Bible. The essays in the book were written from 1987 to 2006. We published a limited slipcase edition, a hardback, and then a standard paperback that is now in its third printing. I personally oversaw all aspects of the design and production. As a graphic designer, I could go on and on about it, but I'll restrain myself. If you have a graphic design class, you can ask your instructor there to come and ask me to talk about it. Magus Gilmore, in an essay titled What the Devil, created a remarkable list of the typical individual's journey from observing reality to declaring himself a Satanist. And I'd like to go over that here, as I feel it actually reflects the intellectual path that I took. Nature encompasses all that exists. There is nothing supernatural in nature. This is the first step. The spiritual is an illusion. I am utterly carnal. Reason is my tool for cognition, making faith anathema. I question all things. I am a skeptic. I do not accept false dichotomies, finding instead the third side, which brings me closest to understanding the mysteries of existence. The universe is neither benevolent nor malevolent. It is indifferent. There are no gods. I am an atheist. There is no intrinsic purpose to life beyond biological imperatives. I thus determine my own life's meaning. I decide what is of value. I am my own highest value, therefore I am my own God. I am an I-theist. Good is that which benefits me and promotes that which I hold in esteem. Evil is that which harms me and hinders that which I cherish. I live to maximize the good for myself and those that I value. At all times, I remain in control of my pursuit and pleasure. I am an Epicurean. Merit determines my criteria for judgment of myself and others. I judge, and I am willing to be judged. I seek a just outcome in my exchanges with those around me. I thus will do unto others as I would prefer they do unto me. However, if they treat me poorly, I shall return the behavior in like degree. I grasp the human need for symbols as a means for distillation of complex thought structures. The symbol that best exemplifies my nature as an aware beast is Satan, the avatar of carnality, justice, and self-determination. I see myself reflected in the philosophy created by Anton Szandor LaVey. I am proud to call myself a Satanist. He continues, these ideas fundamental to Satanists serve as an earthly foundation that we find deeply liberating and welcome the acceptance of ourselves as human animals. For the type of person who feels the need for an external, supernatural parental figure, the responsibility for self-determination explicit in this path may be terrifying. For the Satanist, belief in any actual God or devil to which one would be beholden is repugnant and stultifying. Now, we agree to disagree with those who are spiritually oriented concerning their different approaches to living. Hence, our advocacy of pluralism in society. We Satanists know that our way is not for everyone. We simply ask that others follow their own path and allow us to be as we are. I want to reiterate the language used in the second to last point. He says, I see myself reflected in the philosophy created by Anton Szandor LaVey. Most Satanists of worth that I have known have not described any type of conversion. Though most have an epiphany, it is in the sense that a puzzle piece has been found that works perfectly with all of the others, as opposed to some transformative experience where all that was believed is overturned. Now, for a few concepts. Egalite versus hierarchy. The natural world is stratified. The weak, slow, and stupid tend to be worse for wear. The smart, quick, and strong tend to have a better time of it. In the animal kingdom, the world that we exist in, it is eat or be eaten. In some cases, this is quite literal. Take Werner Herzog's documentary Grizzly Man. It was about Timothy Treadwell, a man so enamored with the belief that good thoughts can overcome the inherent bestiality of nature that he dedicated his desperate life to convincing people that bears could be your friend. That is, of course, until he was mauled and eaten by them. Most of the time, the phrase is merely symbolic, though. But it is truly an aberration to find a people who treat one another as equals. When this supposedly happens, in most cases, it is merely that there is an all-powerful state that oppresses everyone into poverty, but of course, the leaders and their favored ones. Satanism accepts a natural order. It accepts the world as it is, and that in this world there are winners and losers. Bears are not our friend. Not everyone is a scholar, president, or athlete. The notion that everyone needs to be a winner makes as much sense as saying that everyone needs to be above average. No matter where that mean is, half of all people will be below it. The bar may shift for the good of all, But the only time-tested way to ensure that everyone is equal is to make sure that nobody has anything. The problem is, the ones who are in charge of seeing to it usually end up having a lot. I'd recommend Kurt Vonnegut's short story Harrison Bergeron, or the incredible short film based on it released fairly recently titled 2081. Theodore Dalrymple, one of my favorite living essayists, and the pen name of a British doctor who has spent many years in prisons and working with the poor, has written an anecdote about the pervasiveness of this notion that it is impolite to point out the most painfully obvious of natural inequities. I'll quote from his book. Last week, a 17-year-old girl was admitted to my ward with such acute alcohol poisoning that she could scarcely breathe by her own unaided efforts, alcohol being a respiratory depressant. When finally she woke, 12 hours later, she told me that she had been a heavy drinker since the age of 12. She had abjured alcohol for 4 months before her admission, she told me, but had just returned to the bottle because of a crisis. Her boyfriend, age 16, had just been sentenced to 3 years detention for a series of burglaries and assaults. He was what she called her third long-term relationship, the first two having lasted 4 and 6 weeks. But after 4 months of life with the young burglar, the prospect of separation from him was painful enough to drive her to drink. My patient was intelligent, but badly educated, as only products of the British educational system can be after 11 years of compulsory school attendance. I would say the same thing about our own schools. She thought the Second World War took place in the 1970s and could give me not a single correct historical date. I asked her whether she thought a young and violent burglar could have produced much of a companion, and she admitted that he wouldn't, but said that he was the type she liked, and besides which, in a slight contradiction, all boys were the same. I warned her as graphically as I could that she was already well down the slippery slope leading to poverty and misery, that, as I knew from the experience of untold patients, she would soon have a succession of possessive, exploitative, and violent boyfriends unless she changed her life. I told her that in the past few days, I had seen 2 women patients who had had their heads rammed down the lavatory, one who had their head smashed through a window and her throat cut with the shards of glass, one who had had her arm, jaw, and skull broken, and one who had been suspended by her ankles from a 10th floor window to the tune of "Die, you bitch." "I can look after myself," said my 17-year-old. "But men are stronger than women," I said. "When it comes to violence, they are at an advantage." "Well, that is a sexist thing to say," she said. A girl who had absorbed nothing at school had nevertheless absorbed the shibboleths of political correctness in general and of feminism in particular. "But it's a plain, straightforward, and inescapable fact," I said. "It's sexist," she reiterated quite firmly. A stubborn refusal to face inconvenient facts, no matter how obvious, now pervades our attitudes towards relations between the sexes. An ideological filter of wishful thinking strains out anything we prefer not to acknowledge about these eternally difficult and contested relations with predictably disastrous results. Now, you can believe that everyone is equal. You can live a life of pacifism, intentional poverty, give away your car, sacrifice, and your neighbor will thank you. They will admire your courage, and then they will go home and eat a nice fat meal, and their shitty little brat will come and steal your bike later. The physical sciences show that there is natural inequality between both groups and individuals, physically, mentally, behaviorally. But pointing this out becomes what Dalrymple called an inconvenient fact. It is obvious that these scientific facts are the reason that some politically motivated researchers in cultural anthropologies are now rejecting the notion of science at all. In fact, the largest anthropological organization has now removed the word science from their mission statement. Exploration of the genome has shown that non-African humans have mixed with Neanderthals. And where it was once postulated that evolution stopped a few thousand years ago, it is now being revealed that not only did it not stop, but it has escalated. As I have said, though, Satanism isn't a universal religion. It does not assume that everyone is capable of addressing the world as it is instead of how they wish it to be. In fact, to give credit where credit is due, the perfect egalitarians have been found. They are a people who treat all like their brother, are kind to all races and religions, and totally lack any suspicion of others' motivations. The name that's been given to these type of good shepherds is Williams syndrome, and it's a type of mental and physical retardation. On the other hand, researchers have found that oxytocin, the chemical that our brain secretes when we are hugged by a loved one or have sex, and that reduces anxiety, creates a feeling of bonding, and can also trigger orgasm, also makes women ethnocentric, preferring their own in-group at the expense of others. Satanism takes few very overtly political positions, and there is absolutely no affiliation between the church and any political party. Satanists are free to associate with whatever labels that they choose, and I've met those who have identified with everything from communism to anarchism. The Satanic philosophy positions itself as a third side, rejecting the simplistic dichotomies of good versus evil, Republican versus Democrat, liberal and conservative. It is my experience, though, that a majority of Satanists find an accord with libertarianism. And though I've used the term to describe my own position, it was merely as a heuristic, as a thumbnail for someone that I didn't really care to get into a full conversation with. The one position most clearly associated with politics is lex talionis, or retributive justice. Most people associate it with the Old Testament eye for an eye, but I think the best case is to be found in the Icelandic sagas. Jesus explicitly rejects the notion of retributive justice in favor of forgiveness. In Matthew 5:38-39, the character of Jesus says, quote, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. If anyone strikes you on one cheek, turn him the other also." Objectors to talionic justice, as opposed to the weak compensatory justice we're supposed to have now, is that it cheapens life, and this cannot be further from the truth. Let me pose a simple question. If you, through neglect or ill will, maim another human being, right now you may be currently liable for tens of thousands of dollars. Now imagine what you'd be willing to pay if they had the right to come and maim one of your extremities. I'd imagine it would be a little bit more. Life under talionic law is the opposite of cheap. It is the most expensive commodity there is. And there is no proof that there are more eyeless people in talionic societies. And luckily, Christ's dictum of do nothing is far removed from our own justice system. But we still have one that frequently allows murderers to go free after a few years in prison, or worse yet, to remain unpunished due to some sort of mental deficiency, as if the parent of a murdered child should care whether you're too stupid to know that killing is wrong, or negligent to know that being drunk and driving a car is an act of violence waiting to happen. William Ian Miller, in his book on the subject, relates an impressive medieval Icelandic code that simply says, "There shall be no such thing as accidents." I know if this were the prevailing law, I would be a lot more cautious on my commute to work every day. And I guarantee you that manufacturers of baby cribs would do a lot more safety testing. Satanism deals with magic and ritual in a rather unique way compared to occult groups and traditional religions. Again, it is about the frame. It is about the third way. Satanism breaks magic down into two categories, greater and lesser magic. In the Satanic Bible, LaVey defines magic as, quote, the change in situations or events in accordance with one's own will, which would, using normally accepted methods, be unchangeable. He distinguishes between the two types. Magic falls into two categories, ritual or ceremonial, and non-ritual or manipulative. Ritual magic consists of the performance of formal ceremony, taking place at least in part within the confines of an area set aside for such purposes and at a specific time. Its main function is to isolate the otherwise dissipated adrenal and other emotionally induced energy and convert it into a dynamically transmittable force. It is purely an emotional rather than intellectual act, and all intellectual activity must take place before the ceremony and not during it. This type of magic is known as greater magic. Non-ritual or manipulative magic, sometimes called lesser magic, consists of the wile and guile obtained through various devices and contrived situations, which when utilized can create change in accordance with one's will. In the olden times, this would be called fascination, glamour, or the evil eye. Magic, in the satanic sense, is not about shooting fireballs or riding around on broomsticks. We do not have spells that guarantee sex or death, the two things that people always seem to be seeking spells for. When the Satanist performs greater magic, it is an emotional psychodrama intended to charge the participant with specific feelings or to put him in a specific emotional state. It is made clear in the writings that greater magic is an emotional working as opposed to intellectual. Like the power of a masterfully written book or a piece of music, this productive fiction is useful and possibly necessary to the human animal. Lesser magic, however, is the skillful use of psychology to manipulate others to your own will. It strikes many in a distasteful way, those types who think that there is a higher, selfless calling that we're supposed to achieve. I'll have none of it. All humans work toward ego gratification, though some are masochists, of course, by nature, and it feeds their desire to sacrifice for others. In the satanic framework, it's perfectly acceptable to be a masochist, sexual or otherwise. Being master of oneself is to know your desires. And if that desire is to please someone else, then one should seek to fulfill that need. In greater magic, there are numerous rituals and explanations published in satanic literature. But because the religion is not of a revelatory doctrine or faith-based, the individual is free to search through whatever sources that inspires them. Man, of course, invented his God, so therefore he invented his rituals to suit himself as well. Gilmore writes in the introduction to a ritual based on the Norse legends, We find world mythology to be our field from which to harvest symbols and metaphors, from which we find to resonate most strongly with our satanic natures. When exploring a particular historical mythology, we do not simply pick something that's just not Christian or not part of Christianity's various antecedents and offshoots. We look instead to a myth system and ferret out its unique dark side, the taboo and forbidden regions that its adherents held in awe and terror. That is where the devils are found. The Satanic Scriptures published a wedding ceremony for the first time, though they have been performed since the early days of the organization. And it was actually during the production of the book that I was married myself. And I chose to adapt that very ceremony to my own needs. As egoists, it is expected that a Satanist would need to change things to suit themselves. And though I kept much of the text, I added and altered it for the occasion with input and approval from my wife-to-be. As a priest, I have performed a number of weddings, a few secular, 2 overtly satanic. In 2009, I performed a satanic wedding in a medieval walled city of Gruyère in Switzerland. It was in the shadow of the 13th century castle that Swiss surrealist H.R. Giger has an apartment and a museum dedicated to his fantastic art. The couple, good friends of mine, when they first met fortuitously enough on 666, were then married on 999. The Church of Satan is the first religious organization in the United States that I know of to perform and sanction marriages between homosexuals. It was not legally binding, of course, but as Magus Gilmore states in the Satanic Scriptures, in Satanism, the basis for a couple forming a union is the loving relationship that they have created. It does not matter if the couple is of the same or opposite sexes. This bond requires no sanction from the state, nor any blessings by deities of any sort. It is formed by the partners, will be sustained by them, and may dissolve when they evolve beyond whatever factors cause their love to flourish. When we form deep relationships, they are between the individuals involved and not subject to external social contracts. But the Church of Satan does not ignore the history of human behavior. And so we understand that a loving couple may wish to demonstrate their exultant pride in the relationship they've formed by having a ceremony and inviting people who have meaning in their lives. We celebrate our joy and share it with those we cherish. The greatest resources for lesser magic are to be found not in the ancient grimoires or the scratchings of the alchemists, but in modern science writing, critical thinking, and even some sales literature and the writings on confidence men. Caveat emptor, though there is much occult wisdom to be found thanks to modern neuroscience and the sociological studies, a long history of highly successful marketers and outright con men, there will always be the Phineas T. Barnums willing to sell you a can of shit labeled Shinola. That is, of course, with all due respect to the great Barnum. Now, it's easy and fun to think of Aleister Crowley as a great master magician, an occult superstar, and he certainly is in most circles. And I've got respect for the man as a master of his own destiny. But I've got a better name for you. One of the fathers of modern lesser magic would be Edward Bernays. Has anybody heard of Edward Bernays? Of course you do. Yes. He is a man that introduced his most famous uncle, Freud, to America. And he set about to implement a scientific study of the manipulation of people. He was influenced by Gustave Le Bon, Walter Lippmann, and other thinkers. And he published a book in 1928 titled Propaganda. It begins, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. Our invisible governors are, in many cases, unaware of the identity of their fellow members in this inner cabinet. They govern us by their qualities of natural leadership, their ability to supply needed ideas, and by their key position in the social structure. Whatever attitude one chooses to take towards this condition, it remains a fact that in almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons, a trifling fraction of our 120 million, who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. Now, in this book, he lays the groundwork for the field of public relations, or what he referred to as the new propaganda. It is a sector so important now that major figures in business, government, fashion, and entertainment, and all these powerful men and women are often afraid to make a single move without consulting one of these black magicians to decipher what the bones say about public opinion and how to manipulate it to their own advantage. There are charlatans aplenty in the field, but it is a dark science that is accepted as par for the course, and even expected. For all of the crackpot conspiracy theories that you may hear from tin hat UFO abductees, hollow earthers, or New World Order aficionados, Edward Bernays was a man who proudly trumpeted the false flag operation as an effective business strategy. One of the most fascinating fringe forums of lesser magic is the burgeoning pickup artists community, or game, according to the new vernacular. This is a subculture that has seemingly pushed all consideration of social norms aside to focus on creating a system of seduction techniques based on empirical testing. Though the claims made by those in the neuro-linguistic programming camp are dubious at best, there is probably much good and pragmatic amateur science going on, if not the most rigorous. But Anton LaVey was way ahead of this trend when he published his own book on lesser magic, and he sided with the other sex. Originally titled The Complete Witch, subtitled What to Do When Virtue Fails, and later republished as The Satanic Witch, LaVey distilled all his own theories of human nature into a guidebook for women to manipulate men to their own gain. Now, there is no coy euphemism or sanctimony, as you probably would expect at this point. With chapters titled Looks Mean Everything, Bitchcraft, and subsections named You Don't Have to Be Ugly, How and When to Lie, and Learn to Be Stupid, it's going to strike the average reader, and especially the sanctimonious type, as sexist, discriminatory, prurient, and morally bankrupt of a book. It is. But in the words of Spinal Tap, what's so bad about being sexy? You don't read a book called The Satanic Witch because you want equality. You read it because you want to have control, even if you're pretending to be equal. In The Complete Witch, he introduces what is called the law of the forbidden. It is simple. Nothing is so fascinating as that which is not meant to be seen. After introducing this law of the forbidden, his next section is appropriately entitled Secrets of Indecent Exposure. Now, in the early 70s, there was an instance There was one instance of many of an academic who has tried to infiltrate the Church of Satan in order to write about them from an insider's perspective. The paper that resulted from it was published in a book called The New Religious Consciousness, and the author was Randall H. Alfred. It's interesting to read these outsiders' reports of Satanism. At some point, the author had a change of ethics in regard to his covert participation, but quickly found out LaVey had pegged him from the start. He states, quote, "I had joined the group to do research and later got personally involved. But from a satanic perspective, my deception and covert aims, my play acting and feigning, and my use of other people for my own ends were all components of lesser magic. Thus, my feint was typically satanic, so I was not feigning. And the last diabolical laugh was not mine." A few unkind words. Now, I am not here to specifically attack religion, but I'd be obfuscating if I pretended that it wasn't a part of what makes me tick. I would be lying if I implied that I respected all beliefs as being equally valid. They are not. I hear those pessimistic words from Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Redbeard, and LaVey, and it gives me the joy of Schadenfreude. That is when you'll hear me say hallelujah. If I wasn't interested in accusing those self-proclaimed men of God of the lies they pass off as heavenly commands, well, I wouldn't openly call myself a Satanist. There's a saying, knowing when to tuck in the Baphomet. It is quite simple that any Machiavellian-minded human will know that what works to his advantage and what works against it. Duplicity to others is no real sin, but to yourself, unforgivable. With that, I'd like to digress with a few unkind words before I finish. I have an associate in the UK. Her name is Magda Graham. She is in the latter stages of a debilitating disease and is housebound. Because of this, she's found the time to collate news stories about Christian child abuse, and that is the name of the website. In preparing this talk, I went to the site and I looked up the total post counts. In 2010, she gathered 2,902 stories about priests who rape children, priests who rape nuns, and churches that intentionally cover up these crimes. One defense of the Catholic priesthood and the Christian priesthood at large is that there is a slightly smaller percentage of priests who rape children than in the general population. And that may be true. But what I want to know is, this is a self-selected group of men who feel so strongly about their religion that they are willing to give everything up, to ostensibly commit their life, to commit to a life of celibacy and sacrifice to their fellow man. If humans are so fucked up that this elite group of God's soldiers can only do slightly better than everyone else in the world, I can't imagine that's much of a defense of there being any kind of moral guide to anyone. It seems to me that makes them about just like any other chump. The second month of this year is just over. And she's already gathered some 500 stories. Multiply that by 6, and she's on track to having double the amount of news stories about priests gone wild. But there's a trope that's attributed to Stalin. It says, "A single death is a tragedy. A million is merely a statistic." 2,902 stories, gathered by just one person. It's not going to be all the stories. Some of them will be about the same cases, but some of them may be about many, many children, hundreds in some cases. If my goal was to really convince you, I'd tell you a story about one of those children. I'd get you to think about your own children if you have any. If you don't, your siblings or maybe your nephews. Being alone with someone that everyone has told them was the most honest, pious, and trustworthy man in their community, and then have that man put a loaded pistol to that child's head and sodomize them, as has happened. Or the Muslim man who killed his daughter because she refused to marry the man that he chose for her. Or the Moel, which is a Jewish rabbi who does circumcisions, who spread herpes to multiple infants because he adheres to the orthodox practice of sucking the blood from the penis of babies with his own mouth. There is no God. I am confident in saying that. You may disagree, and that is fine. If there were a God and nature is his work, he is a cruel son of a bitch. If there is a God and his followers exemplify his teaching, then he is a sick son of a bitch with a twisted sense of humor. So I'm asked, why be a Satanist? Why not just ignore Christianity, Judaism, and Islam? And I'll tell you why. It is because they won't ignore me and mine. They still want to create law based on their myths. They want to spend time in my bedroom and watch my computer to make sure I don't do anything that they wouldn't approve of. I am a Satanist because I believe that humans are like a herd animal. Though the pendulum of law and morality may swing back and forth from one extreme to another, the majority will always be the type who thinks that they know better than you what you should do with your body and mind. And there will always be those who find it impossible not to be damned and defiant, unafraid to call that dark force of nature that eternally works against the utopian fantasists the name that they have chosen, Satan. In other times and other places, it may have been called by a different name, but it has always been there. And the shuffling hordes always think that all that said, Satanism isn't merely about attacking the status quo. It is about breaking away the rotten conventions to cultivate an individual who can master his own being, to look out for himself and those that are worth his attentions and affections. The major religions have taught us that love and marriage is about subservience and making babies for God. What I want to know is, why does God need so many slaves and babies? It's beyond me. But there is a wonderful poem by the freethinker Robert G. Ingersoll that has a beautiful satanic message. It is simply titled Love. And I think you may find some of the themes in my talk reflected in his words. Love is the only bow on life's dark cloud. It is the morning and evening star. It shines upon the babe and sheds its radiance on the quiet tomb. It is the mother of art, inspirer of poet, patriot, and philosopher. It is the air and light of every heart, builder of every home, kindler of every fire and every hearth. It was the first to dream of immortality. It fills the world with melody, for music is the voice of love. Love is the magician, the enchanter, what changes worthless things to joy and makes right royal kings and queens of the common clay. It is the perfume of that wondrous flower, the heart. And without that sacred passion, that divine swoon, we are less than beasts. With it, the earth is heaven, and we are gods. Thank you for listening.